112 operators of Reddit. What's the worst, saddest 112 call you got? Part 1? Please like and subscribe to support this channel. A friend who works for 911 told me this story recently. A woman called in a frantic state. She and her husband were driving down a residential street on a normal clear day in their neighborhood when a man rolled a bowling ball into the street. She ran over the ball and it got stuck underneath. She stopped, her husband, the passenger, got out of the car and went underneath to remove it. As this is happening, the male who threw the bowling ball was hiding behind a parked car nearby, ran up to her car, opened her door and stole her purse. In a panic, she jammed on the gas and ran over her husband. She panicked again, put it in reverse and ran him over a second time. When she got out of her car, she called police. She was screaming, but my friend could also hear her husband talking to her. She was screaming and kept saying how sorry she was. He was totally calm and kept telling her it was okay. He didn't sound hurt at all and my friend thought he wasn't injured. When officers arrived, they determined his chest was crushed and died shortly afterwards. He was probably in shock when she heard him. The male who threw the bowling ball fled but turned himself in later that day. I just quit in January, but I was a 911 operator for 6.5 years. The call that sticks out as the worst is a murder that was actively happening. A son in his 40s was drunk and stabbed his mother, who was in her 60s, to death while her husband dialed 911. You could hear the grunting and the mother and father begging us to hurry, and the just screaming. When police arrived, the mother was dead, and the father was still trying to pull the son off of his mother. Total response time was around 4 minutes. Son was sentenced to 40 years. I was dispatching when a death call came up on my board. It was my grandfather. It was unexpected. Talking to kids whose parents are beating each other up, or one is beating the crap out of the other, are always bad. My biggest fear is a fire call at my house or the location where my kid is. I don't live in a country where school shootings are a regular thing, so I'm less concerned about something happening at her school. Funny enough, I'm not super worried about getting the call that my kid has scarpered from the day home or her grandparents. We typically find those kids very quickly because 99.9% of them just decide to take themselves for a walk while someone's in the washroom. CW. Assault, abuse, child death. Greater than. I talked to a 9-year-old who was calling because dad was beating the 11-year-old with a frying pan for being a slut. I could hear the sound as the frying pan was hitting her. Another was a guy the first could barely understand. Thankfully he called from a landline so we knew his location. His dad, he was like 21 years old, had suddenly attacked him and beat him with a hammer in the head, which was why it was so difficult to understand him. I've dispatched dead kid calls, including where the kid ran off then was found dead in the nearby pond. One of the worst situations my caller was in was a lady with 3 kids. Her husband had beaten her nearly to death in front of the kids, choked her unconscious multiple times, raped her in front of the kids, when kids were elementary school aged, then did about 2 years in jail for it. Then she had to continue to see him every week because the courts refused to grant her a protection order or custody of the kids because he did his time in jail and he never sent the kids to the hospital. Exclamation mark. Is 112 the same as 911? I'm in the UK and answered emergency ambulance calls. Lots of sad and scary stories. I once took a call from a woman in her 50s who went to see why her son in his 20s hadn't come down for breakfast. She went up to check on him and found that he'd choked on vomit. They didn't know why he'd vomited, no alcohol or drugs in his system, and died. His bedroom was next to hers and she was so devastated that he was so close to her and she hadn't been able to help him. His age and the way she was trying so hard to talk to me without bursting into tears absolutely destroyed me. This was over 6 months ago and I still think about it regularly. Took a phone call from a guy who'd been in a car accident with his very pregnant wife. Neither the baby nor the mother survived, unfortunately. The guy was in shock and quite calm initially but eventually broke down on the phone and I had to get a manager to step in and take over due to being so upset myself. A girl, maybe 15 I think, found her dad collapsed on the floor when she got home from school. I talked her through chest compressions until the ambulance arrived. Tried my best to keep her calm but she screamed and cried, begging for help. She did an incredible job but I believe her dad died in the end. I don't do the job anymore. Found the shifts to be unsuitable for me, but ultimately the emotional nature of the job was too much and left me exhausted. Suicidal calls are usually the worst. Most just want someone to talk to, and ask for help, but there are others who have made up their mind, and just want emergency services to find them before their family does. You try to keep them talking long enough, but it doesn't always work. Definitely calls from family who did find them are the worst. Saddest call was similar, but was a woman who stopped mid-call and asked me, "Do you really care about the people you talk to?" Hard to explain the tone in her voice, but it was really sad. My aunt used to be a 911 operator in a small town. She said the worst was a call that she didn't get. She worked night shift with one other woman and 2 calls came in at once. One was a car accident and the one on my aunt's line was a woman complaining that her street wasn't plowed. She talked to her for a while to calm her down, but in the meantime, a 3rd call was missed. It had been a teenage girl calling because her stepfather was beating up her mother. She disconnected before my aunt could switch lines. Back then, there was no voicemail, but she called back and a man answered, saying she called by mistake. The stepfather ended up shooting the mother and her 2 kids, but the kicker is that it wasn't until hours after the call. So there would have been time for police to get there if she'd been able to answer the call. She's also not sure if her follow-up call was what set him off. I'm not a call taker, but I'm in the same line of work. There are 2 that really stand out to me. The first isn't a tragedy on the scale of the others, but it was the small-scale heartbreak that really killed me. This guy, on his way home from work, saw a homeless man on the street and it was horrific weather, biting cold, howling wind, wet. He brought him in, gave him dinner, wanted to wash his clothes and give him a shower and a place to stay for the night. The homeless guy was hopped up on drugs and started smashing the place up after dinner. Kind citizen had just had his house done up and got his kindness rewarded with that. Just reading the job, not even being on the call, you could see the heartbreak and the loss of faith in humanity. The other, a suicide. They're always rough, but for some reason, hanging seemed to hit harder and seem a little bleaker to me. This one was a 14-year-old girl who had hung herself, and hearing that really made my eyes sting. I had to leave the room when I found out she had a twin. Suicide line. He died. Oh my God, he died. Miss, are you alright? He's dead. He was killed. Who died, miss? Do you hear me? If you are in danger and can't talk, press a number on your phone. I'm calling my supervisor at that time. I needed his agreement to call the police. Miss, do you hear me? I'm sorry. Couldn't make out what she said. It will be all right, miss. Just tell me where you. Gunshot. What was that? Are you injured? Answer me. At that point I was shaking and my supervisor took the call and told me to go to the break room. After the worst hour of my life, he came to see me. The police had found a body in the apartment. Gunshot wound to the head with an hunting rifle, phone still on the line. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. The police treated this as a suicide. They didn't find another body. I still have no idea what she was talking about or even if it was real, but I quit that day. I can still hear her voice and that horrible gunshot. Worst regrets is that I don't even know who she was, what had driven her to that point, or can't even remember her last words. If I had called the police sooner. Thank you, Renault, for maintaining the suicide line. You joked about it, but you saved lives. You made my 5 months with you a blessing, even with that terrible end. My wife used to be a dispatcher and she had 2 calls that really stuck with her. 1. A drunk man drove his car into a pond and could not get out of the vehicle. He seemed too drunk to be able to follow her instructions, and she ended up staying on the phone with him long enough to hear him taking his last gasps of air. It took the police department 2 days to find his vehicle based off triangulation. 2. A call came in from a woman that said her ex-husband was banging on the front door with the intention of killing her. She said that she first had called her parents to let them know before calling the police. My wife listened to this man get into the home and murder her. He went on to drive to her parents' house with the intention of killing them, but they had crossed paths on the way to their daughter's house. The husband ended up shooting himself in the head on her parents' doorstep. That call she made saved their lives. Obligatory, not 112, but a 911 call taker, dispatcher. It was a very slow night. The kind of night here people are just mindlessly sitting there waiting for a call. My agency separates dispatchers and call takers, so if you're a 911 call taker, you're literally only taking calls. This lady calls the non-emergency number. If you call the non-emergency number, we do not get the location information as we would on a 911. No, it's not like the movies. I cannot always find you since it usually give me a general area of where you are. She calls and says she wants someone to talk to. She seems sad, possibly a little drunk, but not incoherent. I ask her what's going on, as asking to talk to someone is usually a dead giveaway. There may be some suicidal ideations. She tells me she's feeling sad but doesn't want to do anything. Once again, we're slow, so I decided to entertain her. I let her talk to me about her life, her kids, her ex-husband, her finances, just whatever she wanted to talk about. It became more clear that she was depressed. I kept offering to have an officer to come out to chat in person so we can evaluate her. She didn't want to give her address. This lady knew what she was doing and would not tell me she's going to hurt herself or anything to make this a solid suicide call to get officers out there fast. It was frustrating. After talking for 35 minutes, I make up some sort of white lie just to get her address. I finally have it. By now we have been talking for 50 minutes. I am getting quite frustrated that this woman won't just tell me she wants to kill herself so I can get her the fast help. I actually felt bad having to lie to get her address. Eventually I tell her that I know she doesn't want to meet with an officer, but I want someone to go check on her and give her some resources. She replies with, "Honestly, I don't want to waste the officer's time. You talking to me was the best thing I've had in a long time. Thank you so much. I'm going to go warm up some macaroni that's in my fridge, cuddle with cats and head to bed. Thank you. My name. Have a good night," and then hung up. When I tell you I had a huge amount of conflicting thoughts, I did. I was angry she wouldn't tell me she was going to kill herself. I was sad her life has been rough. I felt I was breaking our trust by sending an officer since she didn't want one. I sat there and thought for a few minutes, and I sent up a call for them just to go check on her. The officers get there with no answer to their knock on the door. They peek in the bedroom window and she's sound asleep cuddling with her cat in bed. God, I hope that woman is doing better. I've taken much more stressful, difficult, traumatizing calls. I've heard people die mid-sentence with me. People screaming as their child lay lifeless, sobbing while their significant other is just dead in the car from an accident. This call is the one that stuck with me and I have no clue why. Not a operator, but I am a first responder, EMS, 911. I had a 13-year-old girl who got into an argument with her mother, and a few minutes later she took a bandana and hung herself on her ceiling fan above her bed. Had to cut her down while her mother screamed and rolled on the floor in pain. We ended up not be able to get her back. She was very hard to intubate with her jaw clenched shut super hard. No heart rhythm changes, stayed in asystole the whole time. Hospital staff pronounced her dead in the ER when we got her over to them after working her for a bit. I also had a 3-month-old baby go into cardiac arrest on Thanksgiving during Thanksgiving dinner, and we couldn't get that little girl back either. Edit. I also forgot about this dad and his daughter traveling, and they lost control of their SUV. They hit a tree head-on and the airbag didn't deploy, and the father's head went through the steering wheel and his brains were hanging out. His daughter was mentally handicapped and had left side of her face basically degloved to where you could see her skull. Her dad was slumped over in the driver's seat with the phone GPS still going off in his lap while he was dead, telling them to make a U-turn over and over. I had to airlift the daughter by helicopter and she eventually died in the hospital in South Carolina. I think the thing that sticks with me the most is carrying the 13-year-old girl out of her house on a backboard, and her neighborhood friends were outside and they saw her dead on a backboard covered up with a tube sticking out of her mouth, and they all closed their eyes really quick and covered their eyes with their hands. You could see the pain and fear in their face and wanted to cover it up really quick. I was only an operator for a few months. The one I think about most frequently was a homeless man who called saying someone had shot his dog while he was away. He mentioned how that dog was his best friend. What sucked the most about this call, from my end, was that we were getting tons of other calls while I was talking to him. I wanted to listen to him to help him grieve, but I had to wrap the call up quickly so I could continue answering calls. That hurt me. 999 operator. The pandemic has increased our demand massively, but not for COVID symptoms. Huge increase in chest pains, breathing difficulties and seizures in particular, and so our response times are badly affected. My worst call had called twice previously. First call was chest pains indicating suspected heart attack. Second was that her breathing was getting worse. When I answered, there was a lot of family members there and she was having a seizure and wasn't breathing. While assessing her seizure, she went into cardiac arrest. I was instructing CPR for over 10 minutes and trying to keep all these family members calm to make sure she was getting the most effective compressions. Hearing all these people in fits of tears and the fact she had been waiting for an ambulance for around 2 hours from the first call, and sadly didn't make it, really made it stick with me. It was months ago and can still hear those screams of grief. Aside from the stuff others already listed, like the CPR calls or being the last person someone talks to, which personally don't bother me much, there are some that have just stuck with me for various reasons. One was a call from a guy who had just shot his brother moments before the call. From what he said, his brother had some mental issues, and during an argument the brother snapped and started attacking the caller with a knife. The caller, not wanting to die, shot him in self-defense. What struck me in particular was the caller's tone of voice on the call. It's not something I feel like I can properly describe in words, but it was something like complete and utter despair for the whole situation. He truly did not want to kill his brother. Another was from an elderly caller that sounded a bit confused and nervous. She said she had been driving for 12+ hours to get to a meeting at a conference center, but needed help with directions for the last bit to find it. The conference center name wasn't ringing a bell for me, and after some digging I found out that it was a couple states over. After it clicked and I realized she thinks she's in a different state, I made the mistake of telling her what state she's actually in, and that was the last bit of actual conversation we had. Everything past that was complete, pure hysterics. I guess she must have realized how much her mind was starting to fail her and just couldn't deal with it. With other hysterical callers, I've always been able to calm them down or at least get a few words out of them here and there, but there was absolutely nothing I could do for this lady. On top of that, she was in the middle of bumfuck nowhere in the farmland part of the county, so a police response would take a long time on top of the lack of a specific location for her better than where the phone was hitting. Fortunately, some random passerby was a hero. Despite it being the middle of the night, he stopped, checked on her, and even took the phone from her to see who she was talking to. He gave me all the info I needed and even kept her company until the officers arrived. So while I can still remember the abject terror in her voice as she realized her mind was starting to fail her, it also restored a bit of my faith in humanity at the same time.